What's up, Internet? We are here, and we just passed 2,000 subscribers, so I thought I needed something important to do. And I had no ideas, so like any good creatively bankrupt person, I'm deciding to put a list of easily digestible information out there because people like that, I guess. Either way, this is the top 10 NES games of all time. Now, before we get into this, I got some caveats. First and foremost, this is my list. Which of course means it's complete objective fact, and if you disagree, you are completely wrong and should feel bad about that. But, you know, maybe list your favorites that aren't included on here in the comments, because you might have some good ideas. They won't be as good or objectively correct as mine, of course, but you know. The second thing is, I'm not going to include any Famicom exclusives. It has to have been released outside of Japan in some way, shape, or form, and I really have to choose my words carefully, or I'm going to disqualify something I put on here. But part of the reason is, that's a list for a whole other time, and honestly, I don't even really want to do a list of the best on X system, because I've seen so many people do that, and then immediately they run out of ideas for lists. The trick with doing lists is go super obscure and super fine detailed, then work yourself out broader. Once you do really broad stuff, you really pigeonhole yourself, and I don't want to do that. So yeah, NES only. No Famicom exclusive stuff. Maybe I'll talk about the best imports someday. And caveat number C, that while this is my 2,000 subscriber special, there is a second reason why I specifically wanted to make this list. See, about a year ago, around this time, I got a bunch of tweets on my Twitter. Like, it was once every, I think, 5 or so days. I just got these random tweets from this one person asking me to retweet their stuff, and it was a poll to try and decide what the best NES games were that didn't contain Mario or Link. And what really bothered me about that was not the fact that I was getting spammed with requests from someone I've never met and I've, as far as I know, never talked to. It was more that qualifier. Because the fact is, the top 10 list of all NES games doesn't contain Mario or Zelda. I'm sorry to drop that truth bomb on you, but while they are very good and they certainly have a lot of clout, they ain't the best. I mean, hell, if I looked at my notes of things I was considering, I could probably name 30 before I get to Mario or Zelda. But we're here for the top 10. So here it is, the top 10 greatest NES games of all time. But first, a couple honorable mentions. So honorable mention number A is Vice Project Doom. You're going to notice a theme starting with this one, and that is, I like games that like to try and experiment and include different types of games in it. They might not be the most well-polished, but they always try something brave and interesting and are a fun combination of things, and Vice is no different. What starts off as a game of Spy Hunter quickly turns into a game of Ninja Gaiden, quickly turns into a first-person shooter. Seriously, this game is amazing, and it makes me really sad I don't have a physical copy. This one's definitely high there up on my list. Following that up, I gotta give a shout out to Star Tropics. I honestly wanted to give the 10th spot to Star Tropics. I really did. But what made it really hard for me to do so was the fact that it's a top-down Zelda-style game where you have, like, slow, plodding movement. There's a little bit of delay with everything, but a lot of enemies come in and attack you from angles, and you can't move or attack in angles, and that just makes it so frustrating to play sometimes. I love Star Tropics. I think it's a great summer vacation in the form of a game, but it's very clumsy and you have to have patience with it, which is a little annoying. Following that up, we have Worms spelled with a U, because I really wanted to name this game. This is a very anime-style game that combines side-scrolling shooter with side-scrolling beat-em-up slash shooter slash RPG elements slash first-person shooting. It's a weird mishmash of things, and it's very rough around the edges, and I am absolutely fond of this game. It holds a very special place in my heart. And finally, I have to give a shout out to my introduction to the NES games, because I didn't have an NES growing up. It was a little bit before my time, although I did have an SMS. I only got to play NES games right around Christmas and like halfway through the year, because my uncle owned an NES, and occasionally he'd let me play his. And we played stuff like Contra and Jackal, which was probably my favorite out of those, TMNT 2 and Mario, and I have so many fond memories of that. And until I was like halfway through my 20s and started this channel, that was pretty much my entire NES experience. And I will always have a very special place in my heart for that, because that was very special to me. So shout outs to those awesome games. Honestly, I really wanted to include them because they are that special to me, but they didn't quite make the list. Anyway, moving on to number 10. Just narrowly edging out Star Tropics is Kirby's Adventure. This is spoilers, but probably the most, like, mainstream game you're gonna find here, so if you like the really popular stuff, yeah, I'm sorry, you're just not gonna find it here after this point. But Kirby's Adventure was a very technologically advanced NES game. I mean, it came out super late in the NES life, for one thing, but what really cemented this game as being special was not just that it was a huge adventure with lots of secrets and tons of power-ups, it was that, but what really stuck in my head about what made Kirby's Adventure so special is just that it really cemented what Kirby was. Because before this, Kirby couldn't transform and use superpowers and do a lot of awesome stuff. Heck, Kirby wasn't even pink, he was white. Which, to this day, Kirby being pink still is kind of weird to me, but either way, Kirby's Adventure is an amazing game, with the only real issue it having being that it does have a lot of slowdown here and there is some intense flashing here and there, which, you know, it's the NES, lots of games did that, unfortunately. But Kirby's Adventure was a huge and deep game with tons of content, a metric crap ton of levels, fun side games, excellent power-ups that just made you want to try every level over and over to find out what your favorite weapon was, and just so much content to explore. I love Kirby's Adventure. Kinda sad I don't have a physical copy of this, but you know, I've got the Kirby collection, lots of stuff. But Kirby's Adventure is a must-have, and it's really what cemented Kirby as a character, because before this, he was a guy with one game to his name and not really all that much of an identity. After this, you know who Kirby was, because Kirby was like this in pretty much everything after that, and that absolutely makes Kirby's Adventure his identifying game. Moving on to number 9, we have Blaster Master. Hell yeah, Blaster Master. I love Blaster Master. Do you want to know how much I love Blaster Master? I love Blaster Master so much that I don't actually own a physical card of this, not in the traditional sense, and I really should get on that, but I've played this game so many times on numerous Chinese multi-cards, and you know what? It's always the PAL version. And if you're not familiar, playing PAL games on a North American TV plays them at about double speed or so. I like this game enough that I'm willing to try and play through it in, like, impossible speeds to just enjoy it, because I think it's such a cool melding of ideas for a singular game. Blaster Master is all about the quest of finding your pet frog, who's actually a boss later on, and the game kind of just ignores that. It is a game that completely ignores the Japanese plot and has a better sequel that kind of melds the two together later on and is equally awesome, and I've played a crap ton of that. You should go play those games, because it got a few sequels as well. But it is a game that combines 2D platforming and shooting with top-down adventuring, and it's just so damn good. I've said this before, I'll probably say it about 20 more times during this video, but I love games that mix genres and do it with a certain degree of finesse. And Blaster Master is absolutely excellent in that regard. In fact, I would argue it does it so well that its own sequel completely butchers it, but that's because the people who made it never knew what Blaster Master was or how to make a console game. Either way, Blaster Master is an amazing game that tries to do something wholly its own and for the most part succeeds. It's a great game that just feels good. It's fun to shoot things in your tank, hop out, climb down some ladders, go explore a cave, kill a boss, get some power-ups for your tank, and then go explore some more. I love exploration in games, and Blaster Master has it in spades, all while giving you an excellent shooting, platforming, jumping, top-down shooting, monster slaying, awesome spriting, amazing good time. But I think I can top this with number 8. Because number 8, we get a lot more obscure with The Guardian Legend. You know what I said about what Blaster Master was? Yeah, Guardian Legend is basically that, but instead of being a side-scrolling, jumping, platforming shooter combined with, like, top-down adventure, replace the platforming bit with it being basically a sequel to Xanac. This is a game by Compile that tries to add an adventure element to a shooter, and it's really, really good. The music is quite good. I actually do use some of the music from this game in some of my other videos, because I quite like the soundtrack to this game, but it's an awesome shooter with some great power-ups that you get to constantly find and power up as you go through the game. There's a great explorative element to it. The shooting is a huge amount of fun, and it's basically Blaster Master, but for people who are fans of Gun-Knack and, like, Musha, and that's cool. Also, this game did the whole the girl is the spaceship well before Otomedius did it, which was well before, like, Azure Lane did it, and, you know, that's pretty cool too. Girls who become spaceships, it's a good genre that needs more representation, I feel. But Guardian Legend, if you like Blaster Master but you want more of a shmup edge to it, that's basically what this game is. And that's awesome. And it's by Compile. So, you know, the shooting is on point. And it's basically a prequel to Musha. And anything that reminds me of Musha is okay in my book, seriously. Guardian Legend is amazing. Number 7 on our list is a little bit hard to find, not because it's necessarily rare or anything, but because its name isn't included in its entirety on the side of the cart for some reason. But that game is The Magic of Shahrazad. This game combines two different types of games that just absolutely do everything for me. First, it's a top-down action RPG, and I freaking love action RPGs. They're kinda my jam. But then sometimes, for no real discernible reason, it turns into a random battle turn-based RPG. Sometimes. It's very unclear why. But it's all set to a really cool Arabian aesthetic. You get to summon Jinn to fight alongside you, there's some time travel elements involved, and this game does tend to reward out-of-the-box thinking with its puzzle solving and stuff. It's a very clever game that I don't find too many people talking about. But this one is absolutely a classic in my book. I think it's a really, really neat game, and it has stuck with me for a very long time. And not just for the fact that, for some reason, its entire name is cut off on its label. Seriously though, if you love RPGs, you like action RPGs, you love adventure games, or you just want something a little bit different, The Magic of Shahrazad is a very, very cool NES adventure to behold, and there really aren't that many adventure games with sort of an Arabian style about them too, which is, you know, very, very cool. Plus, it has a pretty cool story and some really neat characters. Everything about The Magic of Shahrazad is something I could probably recommend to you. I think this game is very personally special to me, and if you like RPGs, it's a pretty cool Western release. Let's keep the RPG train flowing. With number 6, we have Phaz Xanadu. This is a game I got just last year and immediately fell in love with. First of all, it's by Falcom, and I mean, they invented my favorite genre, the action RPG. Second of all, it has some really cool twists to it. I mean, you can run into some really high-powered gear very early on, but you can't really afford it. But if you grind the money to do it, you can just start the game with some ridiculously high-powered stuff. It has some questionable decisions, like you have to go through 4 or 5 areas with enemies in it before you have any way of defending yourself, which is a bit strange. And the game relies pretty heavily on consumable items, not unlike Dragon Quest, which I'm not the biggest fan of. But I will say this is probably one of the best side-scrolling adventure RPG type things ever. It's a hell of a lot better than Adventure of Link. I cannot stand that game. Although, to be fair, Zelda's never been an RPG, and I will always defend that statement. And let's just be honest, if I'm gonna put a game like Adventure of Link out there, Battle of Olympus. But that's just me trying to squeak in an extra game here and there. Either way, Phaz Xanadu has some really cool cutscenes, some pretty interesting story, and it's an interesting NES game because it exists before Nintendo really hammered out their censorship policies, so you see some stuff in here that would probably not have been put in here had it come out any later. It's weird to see this stuff on the NES, knowing that Nintendo would frown heavily upon this stuff. Plus, you just get a really solid side-scrolling adventure. I quite like Phaz Xanadu, and it's just another game out there by Falcom, and I just love that company. I think this is a really cool game with some great music and a fun adventure, and I mean, you can get some overpowered stuff at the start if you're really willing to put in the effort to it. Gotta respect that. I'm not gonna lie, when I decided to make this list, I had the top 5 completely figured out without having to think about it. 6 to 10, that was a little bit hard because I had about 30 entries I could have put out there. You should see my notepad of me just doodling around which entries I would put in. But for number 5, we have a game I actually reviewed relatively recently. We have Xexes, a game based around Japanese folklore that then gets put into the future, and then when shipped to North America, gutted all the folklore, so all the futuristic cyberfish nonsense kinda just is weird. But it's a cool game where you get to play as an excellent sprite named Apollo, running around, saving princesses and castles, defeating enemies in a shmup-style way, while also doing some side-scrolling platforming adventure. And it's got a lot of that sort of NES mystique jank where stuff just doesn't necessarily make sense and you have to go and like attack random walls and stuff to make stuff appear and you gotta explore this stuff. And I love exploration. Doing stuff like that makes me feel like some kind of archaeologist, and I absolutely love that sort of stuff. Any game that lets me explore and gets rewarded for doing so, even though you're required to in this game, is a big plus in my book. Plus, this game's got some excellent sprite work, some bizarre imagery, which is always a plus for me, and just some really neat enemies, and it's just in general a very fun and different experience, and those are always a huge plus for me. Which leads nicely to number 4. Number 4 is an experience. I'll say that much. That's the best way for me to describe it. It is called Monster Party, and everything about this flies in the face of Nintendo's censorship policies, and yet for some reason, Nintendo allowed it. I don't know why, but I love it. You got a Reaper welcoming you to hell, a character popping pills to become a monster so that he can fight other things. Although, to be fair, Mario eats mushrooms to, perceive himself bigger, so, I guess that's on Nintendo's level. You get to fight monsters that say don't pick on them, and then proceed to fight you. Other monsters that say, oh, I'm dead, and you just have to feel bad about them and then take their key and run. Other monsters will tell you to watch them dance, and you actually have to do that or you can't progress. Other times, you have to just fight food. This is a bizarre entry that would make me really curious what a Japanese release of this game would have been, except it never officially got a Japanese release. It seems to be pretty much entirely a North American exclusive, and it is one of the most memorable ever. Like I said, Monster Party. It's absolutely an experience, and it's a bizarre one that for some reason Nintendo allowed, and it is a very personal favorite of mine just because of how much of a bizarre experience it is. I love the strange and surreal, and this is absolutely that. I think you need to own Monster Party if you like an interesting platformer, or just something weird. Besides, there's not too many NES cartridges that have a stroke and completely flip the script on its tone in the first level. And that in itself is quite cool. Number 3 on this list is actually my first NES game. We have Clash at Demon Head. I remember picking this game up as a sort of no-name thing, wondering what it was, disappointed I couldn't get my actual first pick when I first got my Retron 3. And while this wasn't the game I wanted, it was absolutely the game I needed in my life. It's a game where you play as Yamcha, for some reason, as a secret agent, going up and fighting various governors, including the coolest skeleton ever, equipped with a jetpack, good old Governor Tom Guycott, who's my personal hero, all while clambering through this mountain, learning magic from wise old men, finding all sorts of cool weapons and outfits, and mech suits, and saving the day. This game is huge. It has so much going on for it. It only has 2 songs on the soundtrack, which isn't that great, but the soundtrack itself is actually pretty solid. And I think this game has just such a huge map. I even, when I was in college, made a magazine article that was a guide to this game. I was so enamored with this game. I love Clash of Demon Head. It's confusing, it's weird, and it's completely rough in about 1,000,001 places, but it's rough in all the right spots. And I've said this before, but I'll say it again. A super polished game is all well and good, but, a game that's rough but tries its best and still succeeds in some weird way, that's far more interesting to me. And this game is rough, but it is still such a fun experience, and I think is an absolute must-have for anyone who loves the NES. This might not have been the game I wanted when I got my Retron and finally could play some NES games, but it left its mark on me and is absolutely a personal favorite of mine. Moving on to number 2. You remember how I said I had 2 reasons for making this list? Okay, I actually lied. This is a third one, because I actually want to review this game right now, and by putting it on this list, it just gets me off my butt to do it faster. This is Euphoria the Saga, a game that we never got in North America. I'm incredibly bitter about that. This game is also made by Sunsoft, and while Sunsoft did make cool things like Blaster Master and Gimmick, although I find the skill ceiling on Gimmick to be far too hard, I don't think Sunsoft is really as good as people make them out to be, honestly. Because if you ignore Gimmick, if you ignore Blaster Master, Batman, and the like, they also made Super Arabian, which is the worst official Famicom game out there. And then once they actually got to the Super Nintendo, they decided to make a whole bunch of mascots that never really got their love. But this game had a bunch of mascots as well, that showed up in 1,000,001 other games that had nothing to do with this game, as weird as that is. Euphoria is bizarre. It's a non-linear platformer that is completely surreal and insane, and I love everything about it, and I'm so bitter we never got this in North America, because honestly, this is my most wanted NES game to own physically. But if you like bizarre nonsense in a fun sort of non-linear Metroid-esque fashion with some interesting characters and some really, really strange mechanics, Euphoria is one of the most memorable NES games you could ever play. And it's one of the most well-polished. I quite love this game. I love its bizarre tone. I love its strange visuals. I love its power-ups and its characters. There's not really much to dislike about Euphoria, and it's really surprising this never got a proper North American release. But Euphoria the Saga, it's a great game. Completely insane, and I'm looking to review it pretty quick, but damn if this isn't a game you absolutely need to play. It's just a shame there's no official cart to do that, but either way, Euphoria is absolutely top tier NES, right then and there. 714. There are exactly 714 NES games out there, and I've probably played double as many unofficial nice code games for the thing, so I'd like to think that I know what I'm talking about when I say this. This list doesn't even encompass 1/70th of it. There are so many games I would love to put on this list for the best NES games ever made. In fact, there's like 30 I would like to include right here, but couldn't because I can only limit it to 10. I mean, hell, stuff like Kickmaster, Ghost Lion, oh god, I gotta play some Ghost Lion, Power Blade, Shatterhand. There are so many really good NES games I would love to include here, all of which, again, I'd put before Mario and Zelda. I mean, heck, Battle of Olympus is basically Zelda 2, but better in every way. That said, while there are a total of 713 other games on this console, before I even had to think about what this list was going to be, I knew without a doubt what number 1 was going to be. You see, number 1 is my most beloved NES game. It was the very first NES game I wanted to play, and while it ultimately wasn't the first NES game I ever got to play, it was the second, and this is the most awesome special NES game ever made, and that game is Crystalis. Crystalis is a top-down action RPG by SNK that involves not some sort of magical chosen hero. You play as a scientist who is cryogenically frozen to judge humanity's mistakes in the future after you create an Armageddon, to see if they're worthy of inheriting the planet. Well, as long as we don't count the Game Boy Color version, which completely mucks up the story. Don't play that version, play the NES version, it's really quite good. And on your quests, you have to gain many different swords, many different magic orbs, armors, magics, all sorts of equipment, and just have an amazing adventure, mastering all the many swords, and perhaps finding the Crystalis itself, and ultimately finding out if humanity is worthy of inheriting the planet that humanity has destroyed. The plot to this game is incredibly deep, and bear in mind that's on the NES, where most games were adventure games, or even the heavily lauded Final Fantasy had to explain its entire story in a paragraph after you finish the game. This game has one of the most deep and enriching stories you'll find on the NES, and that's even before we start talking about the gameplay, which is very, very good. The level cap isn't very high, it's 16, and every area is level gated, so you can't over-level too much. Stuff like poison enemies, which are usually delineated in bright pink, are an absolute pain to deal with because poison will kill you. Make no mistake about it, this is absolutely still an NES-grade RPG, but this is best of the best. Had an amazing story, some amazing skills, great weapons, powers, enemy strengths and weaknesses that required you to swap out your equipment as the situation required. This game was way deeper than it had any right to be on a system that was not really all that complicated. The fact is, Crystalis is a must-have for anyone who loves adventure games, who loves RPGs, who loves the NES in general. I never had an NES growing up. Hell, I've never had an NES. But there were a lot of games for this system. There were 714 of the bastards, but Crystalis was without a doubt number 1. This was my favorite NES game of all time, the single greatest NES game of all time, one of the most enriching experiences and most valuable to me as a person. And if you want to experience peak NES, you gotta try Crystalis. I'm just saying. The fact is, I didn't have to think about where to put Mario or Zelda, because while those games are very good and highly polished, I don't think they belong on the list of top 10 NES games. Sure, they have a lot more clout. Sure, a lot of people like them, but are they the best? Honestly, in my eyes, I think a lot of people like to talk them up because everyone else does. The fact is, I think that my top 10 are clearly the best because they do the most for me. They give you the widest range of experiences. They give you a lot of things you don't see anywhere else, and while they might not be the most polished, they are the most interesting. And I have always valued a more interesting experience over basically anything else. This has been my top 10 NES games. As a very special thank you to all 2,000 wonderful people who have subscribed to my channel, who have taken the time to spend watching my stuff over the years, who have helped support the show through the Patreon, through the PayPal. Feel free to show up there and help me out, please. And here's hoping for another large surge of people to see this stuff, because, I mean, I know a lot of great games, and I'd like to show them off, but I'd also like people to see them, you know? Anyway, I want to thank everyone personally for doing this. A big thank you to each and every one of you, even if you're only just finding my channel with this video. You know, thank you for your time. And I hope to see you again. I hope my video has done something for you. I hope that it's enriched your life in some way or another, or given you something to laugh at least, because, I mean, I get plenty of that too. But I hope to see you again. I hope to get continued support for all this stuff, especially on the PayPal and Patreon, because, you know, I do like to be able to afford things. That'd be nice. And once again, just thank you from the bottom of my heart. I hope you've enjoyed my little look at the 10 best NES games. Completely unequivocal, factual accuracy. You can't argue with this because it clearly is the best. And of course, I'd like to hear your favorite games, even though they're clearly not going to be as good as these. Now go play some good games. Peace out, Internet.